Levi's is one of the most iconic clothing brands in the world. It's the company that literally invented blue jeans, worn by cowboys, movie stars, and rebels for over 150 years. But behind the indigo dye and the leather patch lies a much rougher story. A poor immigrant peddler, a struggling tailor nobody had heard of, and decades later, a scandal involving sweatshop labor that nearly destroyed everything the company claimed to stand for. This is the real story of Levi Strauss, and the invention that changed how the entire world gets dressed. Levi Strauss was born Löb Strauss in February 1829 in the small Bavarian town of Buttenheim, Germany, into a Jewish family of modest means. His father worked as a peddler, selling dry goods door to door, and died of tuberculosis when Levi was still young, leaving his mother to raise several children largely on her own. Money was tight, and opportunities for a Jewish family in rural Bavaria at the time were limited. In 1847, when Levi was just 18, his family made the difficult decision to emigrate to the United States, joining two older brothers who had already established a small wholesale dry goods business in New York City. Levi worked there for years, learning the trade from the ground up. He swept floors, managed inventory, and slowly absorbed the fundamentals of running a business before a bigger opportunity called him west. In 1853, at the age of 24, Levi Strauss boarded a ship bound for San Francisco. The California gold rush was in full swing, and thousands of men were pouring into the region, hoping to strike it rich. Levi wasn't interested in digging for gold himself. He saw a different, steadier opportunity, an explosion of new towns and workers who all needed basic supplies, no matter who actually found gold. He opened a West Coast branch of his family's dry goods business, importing clothing, fabric, blankets, and other essentials to sell to the general stores springing up across California. It wasn't glamorous work. It was long hours, tight margins, and constant travel to build relationships with shopkeepers across a rapidly expanding frontier. But it was steady, and over the next 2 decades, Levi built a respected and profitable business, becoming a well-known figure and philanthropist in San Francisco's growing Jewish community. Meanwhile, in Reno, Nevada, a struggling tailor named Jacob Davis was barely scraping by. Davis was a Latvian immigrant, born Jacob Jufs, who had bounced between odd jobs for years across multiple countries. He worked as a tailor in New York and Maine. He tried his luck panning for gold in Western Canada. He sold wholesale tobacco and pork in Virginia City and helped build a brewery before finally settling into a small tailor shop making tents, horse blankets, and wagon covers for railroad workers along the Central Pacific Railroad. It was steady but unremarkable work for a man who had already tried and failed at several different trades. In December 1870, everything changed with one small request. A local woman came to Davis needing a pair of work pants for her husband, a laborer, that wouldn't rip apart at the seams under heavy strain. Davis had an idea. He reinforced the stress points of the pants, the pocket corners, and the base of the fly using small copper rivets, the same type of hardware used to fasten leather harnesses and horse tack. The pants held up under conditions that destroyed ordinary trousers within weeks. Word spread fast among the miners and railroad workers, and soon Davis couldn't keep up with the demand flooding into his tiny shop. Davis knew he was sitting on something valuable, but he had a serious problem. He couldn't afford the legal fees required to patent his idea, and without a patent, any competitor could simply copy his design and undercut him. He thought of the man who supplied him with fabric, a San Francisco merchant he trusted and had done business with for years, Levi Strauss. In 1872, Davis wrote Levi a letter, laying out his invention and proposing a partnership. Levi would cover the cost of the patent application, and in exchange, the two men would share ownership of the idea equally. Levi, always a sharp businessman with an eye for opportunity, immediately recognized the potential sitting in front of him. He agreed almost on the spot. On May 20th, 1873, the United States Patent Office granted patent number 139121 for an improvement in fastening pocket openings to both men jointly. That single date is now officially recognized as the birthday of the modern blue jean. Levi brought Davis out to San Francisco to personally oversee manufacturing, and the two began producing what they called waist overalls, made from tough cotton duck and a new, incredibly sturdy fabric called denim. These weren't fashion items. They were built purely for punishment, designed to survive the brutal daily wear of gold miners, ranchers, and railroad crews working 16-hour days in harsh terrain. At first, seamstresses sewed the garments out of their own homes across the city, a decentralized operation that was difficult to scale. But demand grew so quickly that by the 1880s, Levi Strauss had to open a dedicated factory to keep up. Their signature model, known simply as XX and later renamed the now legendary 501, quickly became the best-selling work pant across the American West. For decades, business remained solid, but far from guaranteed, subject to the same booms and busts that shaped the rest of the California economy. Then, in April 1906, disaster struck. A massive earthquake and the fires that followed devastated San Francisco, destroying Levi Strauss and Company's headquarters and manufacturing facility entirely. Many businesses in the city collapsed under similar losses, unable to recover. But Levi Strauss and Company made a decision that would define its reputation for the next century. The company kept paying every single employee their full wages throughout the entire rebuilding process, even though the factory itself was reduced to rubble and generating no income. It was an enormous financial risk during total uncertainty, but it earned the company deep, lasting loyalty from its workforce and set a standard for how the business treated its people, decades before fair labor practices became a wider industry expectation. By the 1920s, Levi's denim overalls were the top-selling work pants in the entire United States. Then, in the 1950s and 60s, something nobody could have fully predicted happened. Jeans stopped being just workwear entirely. Hollywood actors like James Dean and Marlon Brando wore them on screen as symbols of youthful defiance, and almost overnight, Levi's became shorthand for rebellion itself. Schools across the country actually tried banning students from wearing them. Naturally, that only made teenagers want them more. Sales exploded through the 1960s and 70s as an entire generation adopted denim as its uniform. By 1977, Levi Strauss and Company had become the single largest clothing manufacturer on the entire planet. But success at that scale inevitably created new problems. Through the late 1970s and into the 1980s, the sudden rise of expensive designer jeans from labels like Calvin Klein began eating aggressively into Levi's market share as fashion, not just durability, started driving consumer choice. Profits dropped nearly 25% in a single year. The company underwent painful rounds of restructuring, cutting management layers, and searching desperately for a new strategy. In 1986, they found one, launching a new line of casual cotton pants called Dockers, aimed at an aging population of former denim wearers whose lifestyles and waistlines had changed. It worked spectacularly. Dockers sales alone hit $1 billion by 1994, briefly propping up the company's overall numbers. Underneath that Dockers success story, however, the core jeans business was quietly falling apart. Through the 1980s, Levi Strauss closed almost 60 of its American manufacturing plants, chasing dramatically cheaper labor overseas. The human cost of those decisions was severe and deeply personal. In January 1990, the company abruptly closed a plant in San Antonio, Texas, laying off more than 1,100 workers. Many of them were Mexican-American women who had sewn Levi's jeans loyally for decades, and their jobs were simply relocated to Costa Rica overnight. Devastated former employees banded together and formed an activist group called Fuerza Unida, meaning United Force, staging hunger strikes and organized sit-ins directly outside the company's San Francisco headquarters for years afterward, demanding accountability from a brand that had spent over a century building its entire public image on fairness, loyalty, and honest American craftsmanship. Then, in 1991, the situation turned even darker. Federal investigators uncovered that a portion of Levi's jeans sold to American consumers with a proud "Made in the USA" label had actually been manufactured thousands of miles away in the Northern Mariana Islands, a U.S. Commonwealth in the Pacific, by Chinese laborers working under illegal sweatshop conditions. The subcontractor running those island factories was hit with a fine of nearly $10 million from federal authorities. For a company whose brand identity was built almost entirely on rugged, honest, American-made goods, the scandal struck directly at the heart of everything Levi's claimed to represent. The backlash was significant, and combined with continuously declining domestic denim sales throughout the decade, It forced Levi's into a brutal, decade-long period of contraction and painful public reckoning. By 2002, the company was forced to close its historic Valencia Street plant in San Francisco, the very same factory rebuilt with such loyalty after the devastating 1906 earthquake. And by the end of 2003, Levi Strauss closed its very last remaining American factory in San Antonio, officially ending an unbroken 150-year run of Levi's jeans being manufactured on U.S. soil. The financial damage across this entire period was staggering. By 2007, after 9 years of declining sales out of the previous 10, the company's total annual revenue sat nearly $3 billion below where it had peaked in the mid-1990s. It took years of difficult restructuring, a renewed strategic focus on repositioning the classic 501 as a premium global product rather than a cheap commodity, and a slow, deliberate effort to rebuild public trust before Levi Strauss finally returned to consistent, stable profitability in the years that followed. The company also began publicly investing more heavily in supply chain transparency and worker protections across its overseas factories, an attempt to prevent another crisis like the one that had defined its darkest chapter. Today, Levi Strauss & Company remains one of the most recognized apparel brands on earth. It's a company that quite literally created an entire category of clothing that didn't exist before two immigrants, an established San Francisco merchant and a struggling small-town tailor, decided to take a chance on a simple idea involving a handful of metal rivets. It's a story that proves even the most beloved, iconic brands aren't immune to difficult, painful chapters. Levi's journey stretches from a peddler's cart during the chaos of the gold rush to accidentally inventing the most worn garment in human history, to a genuinely painful reckoning over how and where those very garments were actually made decades later. The company survived and eventually thrived again, because much like the small copper rivets Jacob Davis first hammered into a pair of worn-out trousers back in 1870, it held together under enormous pressure, again and again, for over a century and a half.